real, raw, unfiltered, life-changing advice to level up in every aspect of your life and business and help you reach your goals and dreams. So, Courtney, how's it going? How are you?
Going well. Yeah. How about you?
Happy Friday. We made it to the end of the week.
We did. We did. Been a long week, it feels like, but
I know,
we made
right?
it.
I know it's been definitely a long week. I feel like Friday comes around and it's like, and I'm one of those people that like I do get excited about the end of the week, and then I really don't get excited about the end of the week because I'm really always working. So
Right,
it's kind of
right.
like
Entrepreneur
okay,
life, it's never really Friday.
right? It's
Yeah.
not a real Friday. I mean, things still keep going, right? So,
Yeah,
um,
totally.
so we had some technical difficulties, but I think we are back on. Hopefully, we're good. And before we kick things off, first of all, I wanted to mention that for those of you that haven't been watching the last couple of episodes, Courtney has joined the RAS project as a co-host. I'm really, really excited, to
Yay!
have her on the podcast because first of all, I've known Courtney for what, at least a couple of months now? Longer
Yeah.
than that, maybe, I
Yeah,
think.
I feel like almost 6 months, right?
Almost 6 months. Oh my God, where does this time go? It just
I don't
flies,
know.
doesn't it?
It
That's
flies.
crazy. That is crazy. So 6 months, and so we've been chatting. We've been working together on some things, and I finally was like, Courtney needs to come on the show. She has an amazing story that she talked about, but we're not going to dive into that today. What we're going to dive into today is the topic I want to talk about, which is something I'm really, really excited, to get your take on, Courtney. And I know you're a huge psychology nerd, very much like me. So this is going to be an amazing discussion. And before we do that, though, we are live on Facebook. We are live on Twitch, YouTube, Periscope, LinkedIn Live, basically everywhere, all over the internet. And there's going to be more platforms that are going to be added. Make sure you follow Courtney. Make sure you follow myself also on all the socials. Just look for Courtenay Turner. And with that being said, let's jump into today's topic because it's a really good one: likability or self love. I want to talk about this because I feel like with election what next week, obviously, and so much going on in our country, social media blowing up, like crazy, like likability and self-love, like I feel like too many people are trying to be likable, Courtney. I feel like too many people are not loving themselves because they're so afraid of the rejection that they might face from others. I mean, what's your take on that?
Totally. I love this topic because I think it's one, a really important one, and two, I think it's become very trendy. And typically, when things become trendy, they get a little bit watered down, and the real meat of the context gets lost. But that doesn't undermine the importance, I think, of this topic. And you brought up the election. You brought up how a lot of people are trying to be liked and they're afraid to be true to themselves. And
Right.
I know this is something I have actually personally really wrestled with. And it's very apropos for this week. I launched an op ed actually in the Daily Wire. And
Congrats
personally,
on that. Congrats.
thank you. Thank you. So it's interesting because I co-wrote it with someone who is a Hollywood insider. So they wanted to remain nameless. They actually approached me because one, they wanted help on the article, but two,
Mm-hmm.
they didn't want their name on it.
Right.
And I really relate because I've wrestled with this as an actress. I've wrestled with it, just living in areas where a lot of people had very different views than I do. And I've experienced cancel culture long before there was a term cancel culture.
Right.
So I think that is it's a really tough thing because I don't want to, negate the reality that there are people whose livelihoods are at stake. That the stakes are high, and so I respect people who feel that they need to make choices in what they share, and what is public and what's private for them. But I also know for me personally, It was something I wrestled with for so long, and I've gone kind of through waves of where I have been more public and times where I've retreated. And I know when
Mm-hmm.
the lockdown first happened, I struggled so much because I felt like it was hypocritical of me not to speak my truth. And I felt that I had to do it regardless of what the ramifications were going to be and whether people liked me or not. And it was definitely controversial. Like there were people who did not take well to it at all.
Yeah.
And I did suffer some very real consequences. So, but to get back to, that's kind of, in the very extreme context of speaking your truth.
Right.
Um,
Right.
but I think that, I would love to tap into a little bit about this, like, what does it mean to be likable? And
Yeah.
what makes people,
Absolutely.
what do people think makes them likable versus what is truly self love? Because the other side of this, when I said things become trendy, right
Mm-hmm.
now it's very trendy to sell like self care. Oh, get a spa day, treat yourself. And I don't really think, there are cases where that truly is self care, but a lot of times that's not really what self care looks like. And I think people have kind of a misconception of what true self care is and what self love, where that
Yeah.
stems.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And, when we were talking about this, is when you were asking the question of what does likability look like,
Hmm.
right? Is it kind of brings me back to the earlier days when, I first immigrated to the States and I was just, as they say, fresh off the boat, so to speak,
Right.
and like didn't know any English, to total misfit, cultural indifferences. Like and the biggest thing really at the time was like likability, was like just wanting to be liked. And I think the misconception was likability and acceptance.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really big one because I think a lot of people misconstrue that because they want to be liked, but they also want to be accepted. Because here's an example: as let's say you have different political views, like right now with the election and everything that's going on, right? Is
Yeah.
people are afraid to blend in with others simply because they're afraid that, well, that person's not is not going to like me because they don't share the same political views. It's like,
Right.
and we talked about this in the previous episode of the difference of opinion. It's like it's okay to agree to disagree, but likability and self-love is really at the core inside yourself,
Hmm.
is understanding that, to be likable, first of all, you shouldn't really care about being likable. Like, let's face it, like most people are so worried about, is everybody in the world going to like me, like who I am, or they're going to reject me, and what the hell is that going to do to me?
Right. So that's a very interesting question because I think there is a I'm not going to say that it's not important for people to like you or that people shouldn't care. There is an element of antisocial personality when you or sociopathy when you just truly don't care what other people
Mhm.
think. That's not human nature. We are pro-social creatures. We want to feel that we do have belonging. We want to feel that we do connect with others. There's a reason why being ostracized can literally feel like uh, it can feel like an attack and not just a personal emotional attack. It can feel like a physical attack, and that is biological. It's
Mhm.
bioevolutionary in its bioevolutionary psychological principle because back in Paleolithic times, if you were truly ostracized or if you lived somewhere like in a very rural really cold region, then you might die because we were so interdependent on other human beings. Some people had to do the nurturing, some people had to gather,
Sure.
some people had to do the hunting. So in order to literally survive, to get shelter, food, and water, you depended upon other people, and in a sense, we were much more alike, like pack animals in that way. We were more tribal. So that, while we certainly are not like that today, we do still have remnants of it, both
Mhm.
in our psychological and biological makeup. And we are definitely still dependent on people. We're not islands unto ourselves. So I think I just want to start by saying, like, it's understandable that people do want to be like, that's natural.
Sure.
However, I think that what at the core people need to start with, knowing who they are. So, one of the things when I started to speak out more about my views, one of the things I really had to wrestle with is a lot of people started calling me really nasty names. And
Oh
I
no.
had to, yes. And, people, some of them were people who you know, I had personal relationships with, and I had actually been quite close to. And it was hard not to be really upset and very hurt. But what I had to recognize was I know who I am as a person. I know I'm a good person. And I knew that the names that they were calling me were not accurate. And I had to look at my
Right.
behavior and my conduct throughout my life and the choices that I've made and how I interact with people and how I show up for myself and others. And were these statements really true, or were they lashing out and attacking me because they had no intellectual recourse? They had no argument to what I was saying, and therefore their path was just to personally attack me with things
Yeah.
that I knew not to be true. So, because I'm secure in who I am as a person, not that it didn't hurt, because that I'd be lying if I said, that I like people saying nasty things to me. I don't. But I also
Right.
had to say to myself, this person clearly doesn't know me that well, or they don't know themselves that well. Because if they're going to make those kind of comments when I have never
Yeah.
shown myself to be any of those things, then that's false. And that's either they don't know me, and they don't know who I am, they don't respect me, and they don't value me, or
Yeah.
they're so insecure that they feel their only way of so-called winning this battle is to make false accusations that are very personal, because
Yeah.
they know personal attacks tend to get a response. Oftentimes people don't have, they're very reactionary. It's very hard for somebody to sit back and, the old adage was sticks and stones may break my bones, but words may never harm me. I think we've
Yeah.
lost a lot of that in this culture, because people used to really look at it that way. You throw
Yep.
words at me, they're not nice, I don't like them, but I can take this, and I know who I am. I'm strong enough as a person to fight back with other words or to ignore you. But now people really do get very reactionary instead of sitting back and assessing what's happening and assessing the
Yeah.
value of that relationship.
Yeah. No, you mentioned, I absolutely agree 100%. And a couple of things that you mentioned that, I wanted to touch upon is, first of all, I think people make accusations because of their own sense of insecurity, believe it or not. Because and some people actually feel violated because it's a egocentric thing. I know males do, especially. Is like if someone tries to overpower you or one up you, it's like, oh no no no, you ain't gonna do that, dude. It's like an ego. I almost feel like it's a testosterone thing, in males. And then the other thing that you mentioned at the very beginning is self love, the importance of knowing who you are. And I think, one of the most challenging things right now in the world that we live in is that people are, I think, too afraid to love themselves,
Mm-hmm.
to take care of themselves, to know who they are as a person, like, why do you do something? Does it make you happy? Does it make you fulfilled? Does it give you gratification? And if so, cool. Why are you worried about what everybody else thinks? And you were talking about likability too, that I wanted to touch upon is like, you were talking about, likability in a sense of survival.
Yeah.
Right? Is just that, sure, yeah, I think you need to be likable by other people, but I think there's a difference between likability and validation and acceptance, which a lot of
Absolutely.
people misconstrue. Because to
Totally.
be liked, you can be liked by other like-minded people. Like, me and you here, we're chatting on the show, there's a sense of, likability. There's a sense of being like-minded, similar thoughts, similar intentions. And I think that's what people, are so worried about. And especially with social media, it's like, most people want to be likable by the masses.
Mm-hmm.
They want like everybody to follow them, everybody to like everything that they say, everybody to, understand what they're saying. The reality of things is like, no, not everybody's going to accept that. Like, and you were talking about how, being offended by someone, and it really got me thinking. It's like, as the saying goes, the people closest to us will hurt us the most. And I got to thinking about that when you were talking about sticks and bones, or I'm
Sticks and
butchering.
stones.
Right. Sticks and
Sticks and stones
stones
may
may
break
break
my
my
bones, but
bones.
words may never harm me. Yep.
Exactly. Exactly. And I think about that and I'm like, you know what? People closest to us, the reason they hurt us the most is because they mean the most to us. They're the most heartfelt,
Totally.
closest to our hearts. And, that's absolutely understanding. But, the likability versus self love. I mean, we've talked so much about likability. I want to talk a little bit about self love and what that means.
Yeah.
Self love is, well, accepting yourself, who you are. Like I know this is a really big one. The reason I wanted to talk about this on the show is because people, I think, are sacrificing self love for likability.
I think you're right. Absolutely. And
You know?
it's interesting when the lockdowns first happened. One of the things that I kept talking to people about was that
Hmm.
this was a really good opportunity for people to start to understand themselves and get to know themselves. And that seems, I think, on the surface, it may seem kind of either cliche or silly. But I truly believe most people really don't do that. Most people don't know themselves very well. We spend so much time as a culture looking outward, looking externally. Um,
Right.
and very few people have really taken the time to get to understand who they are, what makes them tick, and what they need and what they don't need, and
Right.
what they need to cut out of their lives, And I think that, boundaries, and I think boundaries are actually a huge part of self
Yeah.
love. And I think they're the part that, we were talking about likability. This is where some of it does get a little bit conflated, and hard to extricate because a lot of people really struggle with creating boundaries. But in order to create the boundaries, you first need to know who you are. You need to know what you need and what's fulfilling for you. And so much of self love is, like I was making the joke before about,
Yep.
like, people think self love is going to take a spa day or treating themselves. For some people, that may be true. For other people, it's saying no to those things. It's saying,
Yeah.
okay, I've been really indulgent. I don't need that right now. Or maybe for some people, self love is discipline. Sometimes self love is actually doing the hard things. But the first step is knowing who you are and being really honest with
Yep.
yourself. And I think a lot of people don't want to be honest with themselves because there's a saying, wherever you go, there you are, and
Yeah.
it's true. The one person, no matter how big a family you have, whether you're married, single, whether you have children, the one person you have to live with day in and day out for the rest of your life is you, the person in the mirror.
Yep.
And I think a lot of times people avoid really getting to know themselves because there's something scary about that. If you really know who you are, that's the person you can't escape. But I
Yeah.
think that that is the first step. People need to really start to understand who they are and then understand what are their boundaries, what are their needs, what are their desires, and what are their fears. And
Yeah.
those are kind of the first
Yeah.
step.
No, those are all very important things that you mentioned. You talked about boundaries, talked about, understanding what makes you tick and talk. And, you're living with yourself for the rest of your life. I mean, people will come and go in your life. I mean, whether you're married, single, in a relationship, whatever it might be, people come and go.
Yeah,
And that's kind of like the circle of life, so to speak, as,
it
even
is.
your loved ones come and go. That's the unfortunate part of it. So yes, you do need to get in tune with yourself. And this is why, I personally probably over the last, I don't know, at least a year that I can think of, I've been really become a bigger proponent for self-development simply because it has to do with self-love, personal development, mindset, health, fitness. And I've realized, and I've had so many people along the way that I've kind of attributed to this and validating that, basically saying that, okay, if you are more in tune with like your health and fitness, then you're going to love yourself more. If you love yourself more, that's going to impact your life and business. And I'm sitting here thinking, like, how in the hell is that going to do that? And I think that's one of the things that people don't realize is that they don't acknowledge that until you start practicing these things.
I was just going to say that. Yes.
Literally, like you have to start practicing these things. And I, of all people, trust me, with my numerous amount of failures, it's like, no, Ivan, that's not going to bring you any gratification. It's like bullshit. It will. You just
Yeah.
got to do it. When you change your mindset, when you start loving yourself more, when you start not saying, okay, I don't need to be liked by everybody. I don't need to be accepted by society because I'm doing different things. I don't need to blend in with the rest of the herd. I just need to be myself. But I need to figure out who is myself. Who am I? And most people don't know who they are because they're living in a fictitious world. They really are. And that's the saddening part because, look, I mean, maybe because I'm also getting older, I'm starting to realize that self-love is far more important than anything else. And it's like, it's okay. It's okay to feel like the rest of the world might see you as an outcast, but you know what? Do you love yourself? Heck yeah, you do. Does that matter? Is that the only thing that matters? Of course it does. Who cares about, yes, likable by like-minded people, but likability and validation and acceptance is completely different. Am I on the right path here? I think we're talking about the same thing, right?
I absolutely agree. But I do think a lot of it, you said about practice. And, there are people, and I see this a lot, people who get kind of caught up in, the personal development hamster wheel is what I call it. They're consuming all this personal development. They're going from, one self-help group to the next, to this coach, to this therapist, and they're reading all these books. But the reality is that that's still a form of seeking validation. It's not truly, you have to practice, and you do have to, you also touched on it, you were talking about failures. So, a huge part of self-love is not, I think people sometimes think self-love is like, oh, I love myself and I can do no wrong. It's not narcissism. It's not hubris. No. Self-love is really acknowledging your flaws, acknowledging your previous mistakes, knowing you will make future mistakes. And it's not like absolving yourself of the responsibility or the accountability of those consequences. Right. It's about knowing that you are flawed, knowing you're a work in progress, owning that, doing what you can to take responsibility and hold yourself accountable moving forward. What can you learn from those mistakes that you've made in the past? What can you recognize about your faults, knowing that you are never going to be perfect? That is not the end goal. The end goal is to recognize what your flaws are, what your strengths are. How can you enhance your strengths, mitigate your weaknesses, and work against your faults so that you don't become a victim to them. I think a lot of times people think self-love is just not taking responsibility. Oh, well, I'm flawed, but I'm so great anyway. I'm being really glib, but that's the extreme of it. But that's not what it is. It is really taking full ownership. Yeah. And having respect for yourself. Yeah. And doing the work.
Well, you mentioned something that I wanted to touch upon is, first of all, self-love is a multifaceted thing. And, you were talking about, being accountable also, but then you also mentioned imperfections. And let's face it, okay? I think most people want to be perfect because the world wants them to be perfect. Like,
or they think the world wants them to be perfect.
Exactly. Or they think the world wants them to be perfect. And honestly, if you ask me, I'm like, no. In reality, you should care about, what you want. Not what the world wants, what you want. So don't worry about perfection.
I would just like to interject on that, though. I actually think that it's a misconception to think that the world wants you to be perfect, because no human being is perfect. And I don't think other people are looking for perfect people. I think a lot of those imperfections is what makes you human and relatable. And in some cases, likable, So I think that is something that people really mistake often, that they think everybody wants them to be perfect. Yeah.
No, I absolutely agree. That's because most people are so worried about outsider perception, whether their own individual perception, and it's really interesting because there was there was a recent encounter that really got me thinking about the whole imperfection thing, right? And it was an interaction that I had with someone, and they were talking about how, oh, we're all imperfect, and this and this. But it's just amazing when someone makes a mistake and suddenly like they fail to acknowledge their imperfections because they're so worried about the what the world might think. The word about judgment. The word about judgment from others, because let's face it, we are all imperfect. And I of all people were the first one to say I'm probably one of the most imperfect ones. But it's realizing that, because let's face it, for one, if you were perfect, the world will be a dull place, because then you have a bunch of perfect people. That means that there will be no contribution to society whatsoever. Mm-hmm. So, and let's face it, I mean, we need to contribute to society. And in part, our imperfections do, because they create experiences and learning lessons. So when it comes to self-love, realize that you are imperfect, but that's okay. Mm-hmm. Love yourself for that, and understand that might actually be a unique trait, believe it or not, that might, gravitate towards others or create attraction from others. But people are so worried and say, oh man, I have a deficiency. No, you don't have a deficiency. You have an imperfection. Like a deficiency is a deficiency in its sense. Deficiency and imperfection is a little different, but at the core of self-love is just saying, taking responsibility, being accountable, acknowledging those imperfections and saying, it's okay. It's okay. Don't blame yourself and say, oh my God, I'm a terrible human being because I have imperfections. That's what a lot of people do.
Well, and I think that also it comes to, it relates to identity. So I think a lot of times what people do is they'll take something that they perceive as being an imperfection of theirs, and they make that the whole of who they are. Mm-hmm. And instead of recognizing that's an imperfection, it may be something that they can work on, that they can, they can improve upon, but it's not the whole sum total of who they are as a person. And I think that's where a lot of it gets challenging for people, because they go into it. It becomes this negative feedback loop. Oh, well, that's my flaw. And, then I'm a terrible person and nobody's ever going to like me and I hate myself. And, when in reality, it may be just one thing that you can work on, you can improve on, or something that you don't do very well, or a mistake you made. Yeah. And these things are, a small facet of who you are.
You said something that I wanted to bring up, and this is probably for a separate episode, but when you were talking about just a second ago, is how people create this false perception of themselves, or they create accusations based on the perception that the world has of them, and start saying, I'm a terrible person. And that got me thinking. I was actually thinking about it in the car yesterday as I was driving. And that had to do with fear. So I was thinking about fear, and I'm like, you know what? A lot of fear is self-induced. And I feel like a lot of fear is self-induced from the perception that we have on the outside world and the way they see us. Sure. And so, and it's different fears, and so that kind of really goes into like imperfections in a way, because, you see yourself as, someone who's incapable. And I think that's where like stress comes about also, where depression comes about also, because unless, of course, it's a chemical imbalance, which then you can't really control. But, on some sense, stress and depression and some fear and the lack of self-love comes from false perceptions of the outside world. Mm-hmm. And, let's just face it. And there's a confidence
or
thing
false perceptions of themselves as well. But yeah.
Exactly. There's a self-confidence thing here too. About self-love. So self-love in part is to be confident, I think, is to be confident. I was someone who, when I was younger, struggled with self-confidence because of being bullied all through high school. And sure. I remember, going through that. Yeah, I remember going through that. And now talking about self-love, it's like, man, I wish I loved myself more back then and be more confident, more bold. But when you're young, I feel like you're afraid. You're afraid to stand up because, like, well, is everybody going to look at me because I'm different?
It's so interesting because we were talking about action and practice. And My father used to tell me that confidence comes from having done something and knowing you can do it again.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there's a lot of truth in that. And
Yeah.
I think, when you're saying that you wish that you had been more confident when you were younger, but that you were scared and it was hard to stand up, I think that
Yeah.
that's very understandable. I certainly relate to it. I think a lot of people listening can probably relate to that. However, that first time you do it, it gets a little bit easier. And I think that actually builds confidence in,
Yep.
when I was talking about personally for myself, starting to share my views and speak up. I know, somebody had made a comment. I had repeated a conversation I was having. They were like, wait, wasn't this the really shy, like you were so
Right.
scared and timid, you didn't want to say what you thought? And I think once I started to do it, it's not that it ever gets easy, because all those fears and self doubts, those come back. They don't just
Yeah.
disappear.
Yeah.
But I'll give you one more example. It's really cognitive behavioral therapy. And I know when I was a really little kid, I was severely OCD. Like, I used to make my hands bleed. I wouldn't share like a drink with anybody. I wouldn't share
Sure.
the same like silverware or anything. I couldn't even actually share the same silverware with myself, my poor parents, and had to
Right.
do a million dishes. But I would play little games with myself because I had so many other challenges, and I wanted to be liked, and I knew there were so many other reasons for people to think I was different and to exclude me and to not like
Yeah.
me, that I said, I have control over this. This one I can get rid of. And so I used to play little games with myself. Like, I would let my mom have a sip from my cup, and then I would say, okay, if I didn't die, maybe I'll let her have another sip. I didn't tell
Yeah.
anybody. It wasn't like this was a publicized kind of, but it was just this. And going back to confidence, I had confidence that, okay, maybe this isn't as scary as I think it is. Maybe like all those germs aren't going to come and attack me at once, and I'm not going to suddenly die. And granted, this is a very extreme thing that not everybody can relate to, but I think everybody can relate to the context of it.
Yeah.
Taking that first step and then proving to yourself you can do it. It's really scary. The first day of a new job, the first day, when you were a kid, the first day of
Yeah.
school. The second day of school is not as scary. That first time you step into a gym or a new town or a new relationship, anything, but it gets
Yeah.
easier. And the more times you do it, the more confident you are in, okay, I may be a little nervous right now, but I've done this before. I've been here. I know I'm going to survive. I can do it again. And
It's
that to me is real confidence.
absolutely. I couldn't agree 100%. And just to elaborate upon that is like you said, the repetition, builds traction and builds momentum.
Yeah.
And so you were talking about, first day of school, new relationship, anything that has a first experience is always frightening. And I think in
The
part it's
unknown.
because differentiation also is differentiation. And that's very same like when you oppose someone on what they believe in, their morals, their values, because you have different opinion or belief or moral values. And this is actually really powerful, the opposition, the differentiation, because it leads me to believe to like how world wars actually happen, or how two countries go into wars is because of opposition, because difference of opinion, because of first interaction, and there's friction. And I think like first interactions actually create friction that we're so afraid of as human beings, because to be 100% confident and bold and say, you know what, I love myself, this is the first experience, I'm going to conquer it with confidence. Like I don't know many people, maybe I'd only a couple people that are actually that adamant in their pursuit of doing that, because everybody's so frightened first experiences and loving themselves, and as opposed to worrying about what everybody else thinks. When is it likability, or is it acceptance, validation from society? It's like, and then you suddenly realize that, you know what, my life, business, relationships is really all about how I perceive it, the choices I make, and how I self-love myself, what I choose to, right? Because it's a mindset thing. And suddenly, but a lot of people don't realize this, how powerful that mindset is to choose,
Yeah.
to have the option to choose, to make a selection, regardless of what anyone thinks you. What do you choose? Choose self-love? Do you choose likability? If you choose both, well, don't misconstrue likability with acceptance. You know, make sure you understand what likability means, but love yourself at the core. Love yourself. Like I've been thinking about
Well,
this too. Is this? Go ahead.
oh, I was just going to say, when you say choose both, I think um, it's about knowing, not compromising. So I think it's fine to choose both as long as you're not compromising yourself to do it. So when you start compromising your values, your integrity, your sense of self, your identity to be liked, then you no longer you compromise that sense of self, and that leads to less self-love. It leads
Yeah.
to more self-hatred, and to depression, and to confusion, anxiety, because you're being dishonest with yourself. So I think that it's
Yep.
fine to, like I said before, we are social creatures. We do want to be liked. That's totally understandable. In some cases, I would even say in some extreme cases, it might even be necessary. But I don't think that, I think you have to weigh out, like in everything, you weigh out the risk versus reward. And am I doing something to be liked that may be compromising the core of who I am and my integrity?
You
And
know.
that's something for me that integrity is definitely one of my
Hmm.
first principles. It's something I value very highly, and I wrestle constantly. If something's going to put my integrity at jeopardy, then no matter how likable it may make me, I'm not willing to do it, because my integrity is more important to me. And that's not necessarily true for everyone, but I do think it's important for everyone to at least acknowledge it and to weigh it out, to really
Yep.
assess. And that's part of integrity.
Yep.
Assess that for yourself. Where do your values lie? What's more important to you?
I couldn't agree 100% more. And here's why: is because this is actually very ironic, because I had scheduled an Instagram post to push out in 15 minutes from now. And it has to do about choosing yourself. Maybe because I was in the mindset of likability versus self-love. And but you said I choose integrity. And one thing that I mentioned in my post is that how many people are sacrificing integrity for likability. And there's a huge difference. There really is, between likability and integrity. Integrity is all about, individuality in part, like who you are, what you represent, your morals and values, which really kind of goes back to also self-love, like who you are as a person and how do you represent yourself, and whether or not, you are representing yourself based on how others want to perceive you, or how you see yourself, like at your core, which is truly self-love. Like, I've been trying to keep things clean on the show, but naturally most people that know me or have been following me know that I curse. I'm very unorthodox. I'm very direct. I wear my heart on my sleeve. And to many people that's very polarizing. It's very polarizing because if I don't agree with something, I'll say F you, man. It's like, if you don't like it, well, F you again. It's like, and to me, it's about expression. And I think in part of self-love, you have to have expression. Don't worry about, what people are going to think, because one or two things will happen. They'll either like you or they'll hate you. And let's face it, the more haters you have, like I've been embracing this mentality, is like the more haters you have, the more it's an indication that you're doing something right, because you're getting so in tune with yourself, which means that, oh man, I'm really loving myself now.
Right. I think there is truth in that, because, if you aren't upsetting somebody, then you really haven't taken a risk. And, I
Yep.
think that is a part of certain, people have varying risk thresholds. There's actually a risk-taking gene. So, some people have much higher threshold for risk than others, which is totally fine. But life is about risks. You can't avoid life. You can't avoid taking risks in life. You can't get through your whole life without taking a risk. And I
Yep.
think that people who have a strong sense of self are, not that they're going to recklessly take, unabashed risks, but, they will take risks for things that they really believe in and things they really want. And that is a part of self-love, is knowing that you may have to compromise something to be true to yourself. And there are other people who are going to have their feathers ruffled by it. Absolutely, I agree with you that if, you don't have any haters, you probably haven't taken any risks. So,
well, that's the reason I actually brought that up, and you actually made another really great point, is just that risk. About risk is, let's face it this way, is anytime you take a risk, that's going to create friction in the marketplace. It's going to create friction with people, because there's going to be some people that agree with what you're doing, and there's going to be some people who disagree. The naysayers, so to speak, are going to start bashing and negating and blah, blah, blah. And next thing you know is you're blocking them all over social media, right? But then the more you think about that, is like, you have to take that risk, like you said, to have some sense of progression in your life. The flip side of risk, actually, that I got to thinking about, because I was reading this somewhere. I think it was the definition of entrepreneurship, is this that I think it was on Wikipedia, that talks about how an entrepreneur is someone who takes calculated risks.
Yep.
And I'm sitting here thinking, like, okay, well, if you ask me, a risk is a risk. Like, how much can you calculate, the pros and cons of a risk? Like, it's a matter of probability, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And you absolutely can. And, like an educated guess is considered a conjecture.
Right.
And that's what you do when you're taking risks. So I've done stunts before as an actress and an athlete. Some of those things are very risky. When you're jumping 20, 30 feet in the air onto a small little crash mat, you really hope that your aim is going to be pretty darn good, because if it's not and you miss that mat, your chances of survival go way down. And your chances of surviving with no injuries are even, lower.
Well, so even then, I just wanted to interject on that, is the probability, the chance is 50-50, whether or not you land on that crash mat, right? Because you either will or you won't. So, like,
right.
Is that a calculated risk?
It's still a calculated risk, because it comes from knowing your sense of skill, your aim, the circumstances of that particular trick that you're doing. Like, for example, if it is a high fall, are you doing a high fall with a flip? Are you doing a high fall off a ledge that is, pretty thick or narrow? How far away is that mat? How big is that crash mat? Are you wearing a harness? Is there a lot of wind? What's the altitude? How many times have you done that? There are lots of variables. I could go on and on. So, to say it's 50-50, in some cases it may be. You don't always know. But, but somebody who's really doing, somebody who does this for a living isn't just winging it. They're really assessing each time. And there are times where, the stunt artist may say, I don't feel comfortable doing that. Like, I'm not going to take the job. So that's totally within their purview. But it's not, I think a lot of people see people who do things like this and they think they're very reckless. Like, I'll give you another example. There's a guy who, I'm blanking on his name, but he does these rock climbing, very high mountains, and he does it without a harness or anything. And I have read and listened to interviews with him, because people think he's just so totally reckless. He just loves the thrill. And if you listen to him, he's actually a very calculated, methodical person. He has weighed out every scenario possible. And for him, it's about problem solving. It's not reckless at all.
Right.
So, yes, you can calculate risks. And some people are willing to take what seem like much greater risks, but to them it's not. So it really varies on the person. Yeah.
No, that example you were talking about is this cliffhanger is what comes to mind for me right there. But, you're right. Is just that, calculated risk is calculated risk. There is obviously always chances for the unforeseen to happen in this case. Right. And I think that really goes back to, self-love and likability. Self-love is just that the unforeseen will happen. The unforeseen is, for instance, think about it this way, right? Let's say you're in a gymnasium and maybe you're watching a game, right? Well, when we could prior to COVID-19, I guess,
Right,
right?
right.
In a fictitious world, and or maybe watching a speaker, right? Let's kind of spice this up. You're watching a speaker, right? And there's maybe, I don't know, 500 people in the audience, right? Well, the speaker says something that a lot of people are like, "Ooh, man, that's too polarizing." Like you can see people looking at each other with like uncertainty, right? Like
Yeah.
they're questioning, like, why did he say this? And they're the only one that stands up and says, "Hell yes!"
Yeah.
Right? Like, yes, I believe in this, and like the instant reaction to that is this: most people are looking at you and are thinking, like, is this guy crazy? Like nobody wants that, right? And that's where I think self-love comes in. Is it's like, if you love yourself enough, you'll stand up for what you believe in.
Yep.
Period. Stand up
Absolutely.
for what you believe in, regardless of what. But you know what? That's easier said than done. I
No,
even
it
find my
absolutely is easier than said and done.
Mhm.
But it goes back to, what I was talking about in the beginning about, these people who made these really nasty, hurtful comments. And
Yep.
in a couple of cases, I had to really take a look at myself and say, have I ever behaved in such a way that would make this person think that that's who I am?
Yep.
And at the end, my honest answer was no. They're making this says something about them. This isn't about me. And I think that is about self-love. For me, I am
Yep.
far from perfect. I have certainly made lots of mistakes. I do my best to be nice to others, but I'm certainly not there have been times where I haven't been so nice. But that
Sure.
doesn't mean that I'm a bad person. And that doesn't mean that I intentionally go around trying to hurt people, or
Right.
yeah. And so that was something that, no, it's not easy. It's a much easier said than done. And it was a big risk for me. And it was also an even bigger challenge for me to sit back when people were making those kinds of comments and to not either beat myself up and decide I was a horrible person as a result of it,
Yeah.
or immediately go down this spiral of nobody likes me, everyone hates me, or I must be a horrible person. You should just kill
Yeah.
me now, like, and I really had to take a cold, hard look in the mirror and assess: are these people one that I even want in my life? Are these relationships that are worth salvaging? Should I have a private conversation with them? And who am I? Are these statements accurate? And
Yeah. Yep.
I think that's what people need to really do. And it's not easy. It's not easy at all, because we want
No.
we want the instant gratification. We want the dopamine hit. We want everybody to cheer us on. Rah rah! You're amazing.
Yeah.
You can do no wrong.
No, that's as you were saying that, I was thinking about this is just that and it really goes back to what we're talking about is self-love, is just that, to stand up for what you believe in, to defend yourself against society, because society will try to warp you in every single form and fashion from a mindset standpoint. Like I'm thinking about when we're talking about self-love right now, is just like, most of the world and society, want you to be like this perfect human being, like, have lots of money, live in a big house, fancy car, look good, be like an amazing athlete, or like
And then
just
they want to hate you for it, by the way.
and they'll hate you
Then
for
they
it
want to
too.
hate you for it. You must be evil if you have all those things.
Exactly. And they'll hate you for it because it either creates jealousy, well, in most cases, creates jealousies for most people. It's like, why so and so is like doing better than me? Like, what do they got then I don't? And it's like, dude, like self love, man. Like, love yourself. If you love yourself, in fact, you're going to be, if you, the only way I think you're going to be successful in part is if you love yourself. But to love yourself is realizing, who am I at the core? Like, what do I stand for? What are my morals and beliefs? And do I care about what anybody else thinks? Really?
I do want to say something about that, though. I actually
Mhm.
don't think success and self love are synonymous. I think there are a lot of people who are very fueled by self hatred and do achieve a very high level of success as a result. And that's not always the case, but there are
Yeah.
people like that. And the two they're not synonymous. And success, on the other hand, does not breed self love necessarily. Some people, get to the top of their game in whatever it is that they're striving for, and they end up feeling incredibly lonely, incredibly loathsome of themselves and the world around them. So a lot of times people think success, but I think that goes again to this notion of likability. They think that they have all these accomplishments, and they almost collect them. The accomplishments are like
Right.
collecting the big house, collecting, the fancy car, whatever it is for them. And,
Right.
success is defined differently for different people. And again, I think that's what self-love is about. What does success mean to you? It's not about what it looks like, because success can actually be a very lonely place for some people. And and for some people, it's not motivated out of self-love. Now, when it's the opposite, when somebody actually has a very strong sense of self and is fueled by, a sense of purpose, and they achieve success via that purpose and drive, that's incredibly fulfilling. And then they don't care who the haters are, because they know their purpose. They're committed to that. They're connected to that, and they're fulfilled by it.
Yeah. No, so you were talking about purpose, and I wanted to elaborate upon that. I think a why and a purpose really attributes to self-love also so much, because you have a purpose for why you do something. And that really, stems all the way back up to self-love, because, you do things for certain reasons. Like, for me, for instance, family is really important. In fact, that's my number one priority is family. In fact, over the last probably couple weeks, I've really given a significant thought of like, well, what are my priorities and how does that fall within self-love? And, I'm thinking, I'm like, okay, family's first, business is second, and fitness is third. Like those are my three priorities. And like, what's been really kind of frustrating about that from a self-love standpoint is realizing, okay, so there's some days where I know I have a shit ton of work to do. I'm like, all right, well, today's Friday. The kids want to go trick-or-treating, right? I know, the time's going to come around. I'm still going to be swamped with work. So now choices, right? Choices. And I'm thinking like, okay. And then if I don't make the right choice, and it's usually I'm facing some kind of friction because of the workload that I have. So suddenly like the self-love steps in, and it's like, Ivan, should you really be kept working instead of going trick-or-treating with the kids? And it's like, wait, no, that goes to your and you get into these debacles, like almost like, your heart and mind battle each other, because like the heart wants what the heart wants, and then the mind wants what the mind wants. Like, can you guys just work together? Like, let's collaborate here. This is a collaborative initiative. We all coexist in one body. Let's figure it out here. And like, but that goes to self-love, because here's what happens is just that, and I struggle with this all the time. It's like, I'm always busy from a business standpoint. I always can't find enough time to go to the gym because, just because of my schedule. And then it's family also. So it's like, all right, the weekend rolls around. I'm like, all right, I need to get this done. I need to get this done. And I start to hate on myself because I feel like it's the imperfections that we talked about. Right? It's like I start thinking, oh my God, I'm a terrible human being. I'm terrible because I didn't do this and I really should have done that. And you start putting blame on yourself. And it's like, no, like you made a choice, you made a solid choice because you believe that was the right choice. And it's about that self-love. You made that choice because in part you chose to do that. It's about the individuality within yourself.
And I want to add something about self-compassion, because, I was alluding to this earlier that, a lot of people think self-love is just like absolving yourself of responsibility. And it's certainly not that. However, it is knowing that you are flawed, you will make mistakes, and it's not making excuses for it, but it's having compassion for it. And, you choosing to learn and grow from it. So let's say one weekend you choose to, it's Halloween. Halloween comes around once a year. You choose, I really want to spend this time with my kids. I've cherished this time with my kids. My kids value it. This is family time, and that's my priority for tonight. And then some things don't get done, or you choose vice versa. And in hindsight, you feel like you made the wrong choice. That's an opportunity to practice self-love. It's not about that choice, it's about how do you have compassion for yourself moving forward. I did the best I could. I thought I made the right choice at that time. Hindsight is 2020, the line of the year. I can't wait till 2020 in hindsight, but hindsight is 2020. So looking back, can I have compassion for myself and know that I can choose to learn from this experience, and maybe the next time I'll make a different choice, or maybe next time I will make the same choice and know that, in some cases something has to compromise, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah. No, that's just it. I think that's what a lot of people struggle with. I know personally I struggle with those things, but what's really fascinating about that is the more I practice that, the more I practice making solid choices,
Yeah.
the more it becomes customary to me, and the more customary it becomes, the more acceptable it becomes. And you brought up a really good example, Halloween, obviously, and around Halloween, we do a lot of different things with the family, and we obviously take the kids trick or treating, Boo at the zoo, like all kinds of different festivities. So like the month of October patches, like that's always really busy, and so I think about this more. I'm like, you know what? I get to experience this once a year. And also, I get to experience this once in a lifetime because my kids are only going to be this age once.
Yeah.
And I really like bringing this to mind. I'm like, okay, well, can work wait? A couple of hours or maybe half a day because it's more important. And here's something that's really fascinating about that, Courtney, is just that I look at guys like Tony Robbins, for instance, who's like a world renowned, coach. And like that's what he's been talking about for the better part of the last 20 plus years is basically self-love. Like, understanding how to accept yourself and not worrying about what the rest of society means, and making choices also that you feel comfortable with, whatever they are, because at the end of the day is you're the person that gets to live with those. So if you're disappointing in the choices that you make, then you're going to be disappointed in yourself. But that's how you get to learn, because you make those choices, and then you realize that, okay, well, that made me unhappy. Well, if that made you unhappy, then what do you need to do to make yourself happy?
Yeah.
And
that's like, your responsibility.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So I know we could totally keep jamming about this topic, and this is a really good topic, actually. Likability and self-discipline, or self-love. Excuse me, self-love. I almost said
self-discipline is a part of self-love, but yeah,
it is. It is. Amazing episode, Courtney. I want to thank you for jamming with me. I'm excited about next week's episode. And got any plans for the weekend, by the way?
I did. Things have gotten kind of changed around a little bit, so but I don't have any Halloween plans, actually. So yeah, we'll see. That may change.
Okay.
Halloween used to be one of my favorite holidays, and it's not so much anymore. And now that we have dictator Newsom, it's less of it. So
yeah. Okay, cool.
I did hear, though, this is really funny. I heard some guy made an invention where it's like a candy chute. So did you hear about this?
Yeah. Are you talking about the sliding thing to hand out candy and alcohol? Like it was you know what? I feel like every news network picked that up. Which,
I was totally thinking that. I was like, if I was still like in my journalistic days, that would have been the story I would have been on.
It was actually, I was sitting in the waiting room yesterday getting an oil change for my wife's car, and I saw that story because, you know what, there's a TV in the waiting room, and while I'm like cranking away on my laptop doing some work, I happened to look up and I'm like, you know what, this is actually good, because out of like, let's say the last, I don't know, like 6 stories that were negative, this is like actually more positive than anything. That talks about
ingenuity. I mean, creativity,
exactly.
making something positive out of a totally negative situation. Yeah, it's awesome.
Right, awesome. Well, have an amazing weekend, whatever you choose to do. And for listeners, thank you everyone for tuning into another episode of the RAS Project. It airs every Monday and Friday at 11 a.m. Central Standard Time, noon Eastern Standard Time, 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, live on Facebook, Periscope, LinkedIn Live, YouTube, and Twitch. And you can also pick up the audio version of this podcast, available on all major audio podcasting outlets out there. And without further ado, Courtney, have an amazing weekend. Thank you so much for spending the last hour with me.
Or not.
Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.